Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt. And subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time. The morning after my grandmother-in-law's funeral, my husband, who had been unemployed for years, suddenly inherited $220 million and handed me divorce papers with a smug smile. "I don't need you anymore," Derek said, tossing our apartment keys onto the kitchen counter like he was showing a winning poker hand. "What do I need your pathetic salary for now? I have $220 million, Olivia." It had been exactly 38 hours since we buried Grandma Ruth, his grandmother, who had whispered strange last words to me about justice arriving in unexpected ways. Now, as Derek paraded around our modest apartment, planning his new millionaire lifestyle, I was discreetly touching the business card of her attorney in my pocket. The one that came with an urgent voicemail: "Mrs. Campbell, you must attend the reading of the will. There's a contingency clause your husband doesn't know about." Derek pulled a bottle of champagne from our refrigerator. One I'd bought months ago for our anniversary that he'd completely forgotten. The pop of the cork echoed like a gunshot in our small Boston apartment. He didn't offer me a glass. Instead, he drank straight from the bottle while scrolling through real estate listings in Palm Beach on his phone. "I'm thinking the oceanfront," he said without looking at me. "Maybe a penthouse with a private elevator. You can keep this dump. Consider it severance pay for your services." Services? 4 years of marriage reduced to a business transaction. 4 years of waking up at dawn to commute to my job as a financial analyst downtown, while he slept until noon. 4 years watching my savings disappear into his endless string of failed ventures. The craft brewery that never got licensing. The app that never launched. The consulting firm that never found a single client. I remembered when we met at that networking event at the Four Seasons 4 years ago. The ballroom was packed with Boston's ambitious young professionals, everyone armed with business cards and elevator pitches. I'd gone because my boss insisted it would be good for visibility. I was standing by the bar with a glass of mediocre Chardonnay when Derek appeared beside me. "You look like someone who actually has a real job," he said, flashing that smile I should have recognized as too rehearsed. "I'm Derek Campbell, currently between projects, but by choice. I'm taking care of my grandmother. Her health isn't great." The story he told that night was perfectly designed to evoke sympathy. His mother had died young, his father was working overseas, and he'd sacrificed his promising career to care for his elderly grandmother. In a room full of people bragging about their portfolios and profit margins, his story of familial devotion stood out like a beacon of humanity. When he remembered my name 3 hours later among a crowd of 50 people, when he brought me a fresh drink without being asked, when he perfectly repeated something I'd said about market volatility, I thought I'd found someone who really paid attention. "My grandmother built half the luxury housing in Back Bay," he told me over coffee the next morning. "But I've learned that money isn't everything. When someone needs you, you have to be there." I was 35 then, 2 years out of a divorce that had been like slowly deflating a balloon. No explosion, just a gradual loss of air, until we were both empty. Derek's energy, his confidence, his way of making even unemployment seem strategic, brought color to my predictable grayscale life. Now, watching him plan his escape with his grandmother's money, I remembered the first time I met Grandma Ruth. Derek had finally invited me to dinner 6 months into our relationship. The brownstone in Beacon Hill wasn't what I expected from Derek's descriptions of his family's wealth. It was comfortable but modest, filled with books instead of status symbols, with wisdom instead of ostentation. Grandma Ruth was 76 then, but as sharp as someone half her age. Within minutes of sitting down, she was asking me genuine questions about my work. Not the typical superficial questions most people ask, but specific inquiries that showed surprising knowledge. "Financial analyst," she said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Tell me, what do you think of the Federal Reserve's current interest rate policy?" We talked for 2 hours about economics and markets while Derek sat between us, increasingly bored, checking his phone and occasionally throwing in buzzwords about disruption, that had nothing to do with our conversation. At one point, while Derek was refilling our wine glasses, Grandma Ruth leaned toward me. "My grandson needs an anchor," she said quietly. "Someone who understands that wealth without wisdom is just expensive foolishness. I hope you're that person. But more importantly, I hope you protect yourself too." The warning was there, wrapped in grandmotherly concern. I chose to hear only the hope. A year later, Grandma Ruth insisted on paying for our small wedding, despite Derek's protests. He wanted to invite what he called potential investors, people whose business cards he'd collected, who might be impressed by a lavish reception. Grandma Ruth had vetoed that plan, quietly but firmly. 20 guests, simple flowers, a modest reception, she'd said. Marriage isn't a networking event. Derek had been angry for weeks. During the ceremony, while Derek was giving a toast that sounded more like a business pitch than a declaration of love, Grandma Ruth slipped me an envelope. Inside was a check for $10,000, and a note, "For the emergencies I suspect will come. Remember, wisdom matters more than wealth." My mother, who had flown in from Chicago, had watched it all with worried eyes. "Are you sure about this?" she'd whispered during the reception. Then, I was sure. I was wrong. "Are you just going to stand there?" Derek's voice interrupted my memories. He'd finished half the champagne bottle, and was now pulling suits from our closet, discarding the ones he deemed unworthy of his new millionaire status. "Jacob Porter says the estate will be finalized tomorrow. I'll have the divorce papers ready by then." Jacob Porter, Grandma Ruth's attorney, whose card seemed to burn a hole in my pocket. The same Jacob Porter who had left me a voicemail just hours after the funeral. "Mrs. Campbell, it's essential that you attend the reading of the will. There are aspects of Miss Campbell's inheritance that require your presence. Please call me immediately." Derek hadn't mentioned anything about a will reading. According to him, everything was already arranged. His inheritance guaranteed, but Grandma Ruth had been many things: generous, wise, patient with her disappointing grandson. But never straightforward about important matters. "I'm staying at the Mandarin Oriental tonight," Derek announced, zipping up a suitcase I'd bought him 2 Christmases ago. "I can't stand another night in this hovel." Hovel, the apartment I'd paid rent on for 4 years. The place Grandma Ruth had visited every Sunday until she got sick. Always bringing groceries, she claimed, were extras. Always slipping money into my purse when Derek wasn't looking. Always staying for coffee after her grandson inevitably disappeared to network at sports bars. As Derek headed for the door, dragging his suitcase, he paused. "Oh, and Olivia, don't try to contest anything. Grandma told me years ago that I was her only beneficiary. $220 million. All mine." The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone in the apartment, which suddenly seemed larger, emptier, but somehow less suffocating. I took out Jacob Porter's card and my phone. Whatever Grandma Ruth had planned, whatever she had whispered about justice with her final breath, I was about to find out. The phone rang once before Jacob answered, as if he'd been waiting for my call. "Mrs. Campbell," he said, his voice conveying a weight I couldn't quite interpret. "We need to discuss Mrs. Campbell's will. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? And please, come alone. Don't tell Derek." I sat down after Jacob confirmed our morning meeting. My hands trembling slightly. The apartment felt different without Derek's presence, as if a pressure valve had finally been released. I went to the closet, where he had piled the clothes he'd rejected, and began hanging them back up, needing to do something mechanical while my mind raced. 6 months after we married, I'd performed exactly this same ritual, cleaning up after one of Derek's dramatic exits. That time it was over his craft brewery venture, the one that was going to revolutionize Boston's beer scene. He had spent weeks creating elaborate spreadsheets, designing logos, and setting up social media accounts for a business that existed only in his imagination. The Excel files were works of art, color-coded projections, showing profits tripling in the first year. Just the licensing had cost $3,000, the rental of industrial brewing equipment, another $5,000, the branded delivery van, $8,000 more. sitting in a storage facility outside Boston gathering dust. All paid for with my savings, withdrawn in amounts small enough that I could convince myself they were investments in our future. The morning he admitted the licenses had expired without being used, he tried to blame Boston City Hall. The bureaucracy in this city is designed to kill innovation, he said, pacing our living room while I stared at the latest storage facility notice. They don't want independent entrepreneurs to succeed. They want everyone to be corporate drones. When I pointed out that thousands of craft breweries operated successfully in Boston, that maybe the issue was his complete lack of brewing experience, or a business plan beyond spreadsheets, he looked at me with genuine sadness. "I thought you believed in me," he said softly. And somehow I ended up apologizing and consoling him for his failure, which had cost me. That was the weekend. Grandma Ruth started her Sunday visits. She showed up at our door with 2 grocery bags, claiming she'd bought too much for just one person. Derek barely looked up from his laptop, where he was already researching his next venture. Something about a revolutionary app that would transform the grocery delivery market. "Let me help you put these away," Grandma Ruth said. And as we unpacked vegetables, milk, and bread that I hadn't asked for but desperately needed, she slipped an envelope into my purse. Later I found $500 cash with a note. "For groceries, don't mention it." Those Sunday visits became my sanity's rhythm. Grandma Ruth would arrive at 10 a.m., always with food, always with an excuse about having bought too much or found a great sale. Derek would tolerate his grandmother's presence for about 30 minutes before announcing he had to meet with potential investors, which we both knew meant watching football at the bar 3 blocks away. Once Derek left, Grandma Ruth would make coffee, real coffee, not the instant I'd switched to for economy, and we'd sit at the small kitchen table talking about everything except her grandson's failures. She taught me about dividend investing, about the power of compound interest, about financial strategies I already knew from my work. But that took on new meaning when discussed with someone who had actually built a fortune, rather than just analyzing one. "You have a gift for understanding money," she told me once. I'm afraid Derek never inherited that gift. It was during one of those Sunday conversations, about a year into our marriage, when I found the credit card statements. I was looking for a pen in Derek's briefcase, that expensive leather one he carried everywhere, despite having no business to conduct, when some folded papers fell out. 3 months of statements from a card I didn't know existed, with charges that made my stomach turn. Royal Nightclub, $1,500. Abe and Louie's Steakhouse, $800 for a business dinner on a Tuesday when he'd told me he was at a startup incubator event. Custom suits from a Newbury Street boutique, designer shirts, shoes that cost more than our monthly grocery budget, all labeled as business expenses in his careful handwriting in the margins, as if writing the words made them real. I confronted him that night, with the statements spread across our bed like evidence in a trial. "You don't understand how the business world works," he said, straightening the collar of his shirt, one of the new ones I now realized. "They're not expenses, they're investments. The people I meet with, the connections I make, they expect a certain presentation. Do you think Mark Zuckerberg wore a cheap suit when he was raising capital? Mark Zuckerberg is famous for wearing the same gray t-shirt every day," I replied. And for a moment, his composure cracked. "That's because he's already made it. I'm still climbing. And if you can't support that climb, if you can't believe in the vision, then maybe you're the problem." The argument that followed was our worst ever. We raised our voices so much that our neighbor pounded on the wall. Derek stormed out and I locked myself in the bathroom, sitting on the cold tile floor, crying silently in case he returned. The next morning, Grandma Ruth arrived for her usual Sunday visit, and found me red-eyed and exhausted. Derek had already left for his networking, and Grandma Ruth hugged me, smelling of Chanel No. 5 and safety. "How much?" she asked quietly. "I don't know. Maybe $20,000 total, maybe more." She immediately extended a check for $5,000, insisting it was an early birthday present, though my birthday was 4 months away. "His mother left when he was 15, Grandma Ruth said, staring into her coffee. Said she couldn't take the lies anymore. Not big lies, just constant small ones. Where he'd been, what he'd spent money on, who he'd talked to, stories that didn't need to be stories. She paused and I could see her debating how much to share, how much truth about her grandson I could bear. I blame myself. After she left, I gave him everything, trying to fill that void. Private schools, cars, money whenever he asked. I thought I was showing my love, but I was just teaching him that someone would always fix his messes. We sat in silence for a while. The weight of her confession settled between us like another presence in the room. Finally, she looked at me with eyes that reflected decades of disappointment. "I won't tell you to leave him," she said, "but I need you to know I'll understand if you do. And if you stay, we'll protect each other." That became our unspoken agreement. Grandma Ruth would help me financially when she could, and I would shield her from the worst of her grandson's failures. We never acknowledged the money we exchanged, or the elaborate fictions we maintained. When Derek boasted to his grandmother about a new client, or a successful meeting, we both nodded along. When he disappeared for hours on mysterious business matters, we pretended not to notice the charges at sports bars and nightclubs that followed. But I knew Grandma Ruth saw everything. She documented her grandson's lies, observed the patterns, waited for something I didn't yet understand. The understanding that developed between Grandma Ruth and me that Sunday morning became the foundation of something I never expected, a friendship built on shared disappointment and mutual protection. 18 months after beginning this careful dance, everything changed with a single phone call. I was in a meeting with a client at the bank when my phone vibrated with an unknown number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something made me excuse myself and answer. "Is this Olivia Campbell?" The voice belonged to an elderly woman, nervous and formal. "I'm Mrs. Peterson, Ruth's neighbor. I found her this morning, on the stairs." She seemed dizzy, confused. "The paramedics are taking her to Massachusetts General." I called Derek 7 times on my way to the hospital. All the calls went straight to voicemail. When I finally reached him, he was at a golf course in Brookline, with laughter and clinking glasses in the background. "Grandma fell. It's no big deal," he said, with appropriate concern in his voice. But I could hear the underlying calculation, the mental assessment of how this might affect him. Grandma Ruth was sitting up in her hospital bed when I arrived, annoyed by all the fuss. The doctor explained it was a mild episode of vertigo complicated by dehydration. Nothing serious, but at her age, living alone posed a risk. Grandma Ruth dismissed their concerns, insisting she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. But I saw the slight tremor in her hands, the way she gripped the bed rail when she thought no one was looking. Derek arrived 3 hours later, still in his golf clothes, and delivered what could have been the performance of his life. He took his grandmother's hand, tears in his eyes, and announced with great solemnity that he was giving up his current business ventures to become Grandma Ruth's full-time caregiver. "Grandma, you've given me everything," he said, loud enough for the nurses to hear. "Now it's my turn. I'm moving back home. I'll take care of you. That's what family does." Grandma Ruth looked at me over Derek's bowed head, and I saw resignation mixed with something else, perhaps hope that this crisis would finally change her grandson. For exactly 1 week, Derek played the devoted grandson. He moved some clothes to Grandma Ruth's brownstone and posted photos on Instagram of himself making her breakfast, ensuring everyone knew what a sacrifice he was making. On the 8th day, I came home early from work with a migraine and saw something that instantly made my headache worse. A woman in navy blue scrubs was leaving our building, checking her phone as she walked to a car parked outside. She looked professional, the type of private nurse who cost several $100s a day. I watched her drive away, then climbed the stairs to find Derek on our couch playing online poker on his laptop. "How's your grandmother?" I asked carefully. "Fine, fine, just left her napping, made her lunch and everything." The lie came so easily, so naturally, that if I hadn't just seen the nurse myself, I might have believed him. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. I checked Derek's email while he slept. and found the correspondence with the home care agency. He had hired them the day after his big announcement, billing Grandma Ruth directly for 24-hour care that he claimed to be providing himself. The worst part was an email where Derek had given specific instructions to the agency for their nurses to wear normal clothes when entering and leaving the building to maintain discretion. The bills were astronomical, $4,000. Meanwhile, he spent perhaps an hour a day with Grandma Ruth, usually during lunch, and posted photos to maintain the illusion. The rest of the time he spent spending money with an urgency that frightened me. Designer clothes began appearing in our closet with the tags carefully removed. A tag hire watch appeared on his wrist, which he claimed was a gift from an appreciative business contact. When I questioned the $3,000 charge on our credit card, he told an elaborate story about an investor who had paid him in cash, money he had used to pay off the card before interest accrued. Besides, he said, examining his new watch, Grandma isn't going to last forever. When the inheritance comes, $3,000 will be nothing. We're just borrowing against our future. Our future, as if I hadn't noticed he'd started looking at properties in Palm Beach, as if I hadn't seen the messages to his old college friends about how he'd soon be single again, as if I were too stupid to realize he was replacing me with the promise of money that didn't even exist yet. The next 2 months passed in a haze of increasingly frequent purchases by Derek and deteriorating health for Grandma Ruth. The vertigo had been a warning sign of more serious heart problems. Her heart was failing slowly but steadily. It was during one of my visits, on what would be Grandma Ruth's last lucid day, when everything became clear. Derek had stepped out to take a call, another fictional investor, another imaginary deal, leaving us alone. Her grip on my hand was surprisingly strong, urgent. "Olivia," she whispered, her voice raspy but clear, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," I said, leaning closer. "The reading of the will. When I'm gone, you must be there. No matter what Derek says, no matter what excuse he makes, you must be there. Promise me." "I promise. But Grandma Ruth, is there something I should know?" "Jacob Porter, my attorney, has instructions. Everything is arranged." Her eyes, clouded by medication and pain, suddenly sharpened. "I know about the nurses," she said. "I've always known, just as I know about the credit cards, the lies, everything." My face must have shown my surprise because she squeezed my hand gently. "A grandmother knows her grandson," she said. "But sometimes wisdom matters more than blood. Remember that. Wisdom matters more than wealth, more than anything." She reached for the nightstand and pulled out a small leather journal, its cover soft with age. Inside the cover, in shaky handwriting, she had written, "For Olivia's thoughts, and for the truth when the time comes." "Keep this," she said. "Write everything down. The truth, not the story Derek tells. Someone should remember what really happened." Derek returned then, pocketing his phone with the satisfied look of someone who had just sold another lie. He glanced at his grandmother, then at his watch. "Grandma looks tired," he announced. "We should go. The nurse will be here soon." He caught himself quickly and added, "I mean, I'll be back tonight to check on her." Grandma Ruth closed her eyes without releasing my hand. "Remember your promise," she whispered so quietly that Derek didn't hear. 3 days later, Grandma Ruth died in her sleep, finally free of both her failing heart and her failing grandson. Derek was at a bar when it happened, celebrating a non-existent deal with money he didn't yet have. I was the one who received the call, who sat with Grandma Ruth's body until the funeral home arrived, who truly mourned her. The drive back from Massachusetts General was extended by morning traffic, giving me too much time to observe Derek's transformation. His eyes were still red when we left the parking garage, but by the time we reached Back Bay he was dictating voice notes about asset liquidation and researching tax implications of large inheritances. At a stoplight near Boston Common, I watched him searching for oceanfront properties over $5 million on his phone browser. His grandmother's body was barely cold, and he was already spending money that existed only in his imagination. "We need to call Fairview Funeral Home," I said, breaking the silence. Whatever's fastest, Derek interrupted, aggressively merging into the left lane. A simple service, quick burial. Grandma wouldn't want a fuss. In reality, Grandma Ruth had told me she wanted her book club friends to read passages from her favorite novels at her funeral, that she wanted jazz music because it reminded her of her youth, that she hoped people would share stories while enjoying good wine and remembering her laughter. None of that mattered to Derek, who saw his grandmother's death as an inconvenient delay before claiming his inheritance. When we reached our apartment, Derek had already contacted 3 real estate agents in Palm Beach, scheduled a call with a tax attorney he'd found online, and looked up Ferrari dealerships. I sat at the kitchen table and called Grandma Ruth's friends from the numbers in her address book, while Derek paced behind me, having loud conversations about investment opportunities and portfolio diversification with people who didn't yet know he had no money to invest. The funeral took place 2 days later in a chapel at Mount Auburn Cemetery that Derek had chosen because they offered a package deal. The February rain turned the cemetery into a muddy field that clung to our shoes as we walked to the grave. Derek insisted on giving the eulogy, pulling a template from his phone in the car and literally reading from the screen at the podium. Ruth was a loving grandmother who taught me everything I know about business, he said, which was technically true since she had taught him nothing and he knew nothing. She lived a full life and leaves a legacy of success. Generic words that could describe anyone's grandmother, delivered with all the emotion of a weather report. During the burial ceremony, while the minister spoke about dust and eternal rest, Derek checked his phone every 30 seconds. I watched him typing with one hand while holding a black umbrella with the other, tilting it to protect the screen from the rain, but not his grandmother's casket. Apparently, the estate attorney had messaged about succession timelines, and that was more important than watching Ruth being lowered into the ground. The reception afterward revealed everything I had been too blind to see. Grandma Ruth's book club friends, kind people in their 70s and 80s who had known her for decades, formed a protective circle around me while actively avoiding Derek. Mrs. Robinson, who had led their discussions of Austen and Fitzgerald, pulled me aside near the coffee station. Ruth was worried about you, she said quietly, her warm hand over mine. She made us promise to look after you after everything settled. After what settled? I asked, but she just squeezed my hand and moved away as Derek approached with his fake smile preceding him. Great turnout, he said, though fewer than 20 people had come. Grandma would be proud. He checked his watch, impatience crossing his face. How much longer do we have to stay? We left an hour later, Derek complaining about the waste of time while I sat silently in the passenger seat, holding a cardboard box of Grandma Ruth's books that Mrs. Robinson had insisted I take. She would want you to have them, she had said, and something in her tone suggested she knew more than she was saying. That night, Derek opened a bottle of champagne I had been saving for a special occasion. To new beginnings, he toasted by himself, since I hadn't taken a glass. He drank nearly the entire bottle while browsing yacht listings on his laptop, occasionally reading prices aloud as if selecting dishes from a restaurant menu. I went to bed, exhausted from grief, and the effort of pretending Derek's behavior wasn't appalling, but couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to him talking on the phone in the living room, his voice growing louder as the champagne took effect, making promises about investments and partnerships that would materialize once his funds were available. The morning after the funeral, I woke to find Derek already up, dressed in his best suit, with papers spread across our kitchen table. My black funeral dress still hung on the bathroom door where I'd left it the night before. I hadn't even had coffee when he began his presentation. $220 million, he announced, standing as if addressing a board meeting. That's what Grandma's estate is worth. I've already talked to Jacob Porter. The succession should be finalized in a few days. He pushed the divorce papers across the table with the casual efficiency of someone closing a business deal. I finally don't need your pathetic salary anymore. It's been useful for paying the rent. But now, he shrugged, you're useless to me. Those words should have devastated me. They should have made me stagger, cry, beg. Instead, I felt something completely different, a cold clarity, like ice water in my veins. Grandma Ruth's voice echoed in my memory. Wisdom matters more than wealth. The leather journal she had given me was in my purse, and inside was Jacob Porter's business card, with that urgent voicemail I still hadn't returned. Fine, I heard myself say with steady voice as I took the pen Derek offered. But I want it done properly, through attorneys. Whatever makes you feel better, Derek laughed, already mentally decorating his Palm Beach penthouse. Jacob will handle everything. The inheritance, the divorce, all of it. A clean break. I signed with deliberate care. Each letter was a small farewell to the life I had tried to build with someone incapable of building anything. Derek snatched the papers with a smile so wide it looked painful. You can keep this dump, he said, gesturing dismissively at our apartment. Consider it severance pay. 20 minutes later, I was in our bedroom, packing a single suitcase, choosing only essentials. Derek's celebratory phone calls echoed in the living room. Friends, acquaintances, anyone who would listen to his grandiose plans. I'm thinking of starting an investment fund, I heard him say. With $220 million in capital, I could make quite a splash. The elevator in our building took forever, giving me too much time to think, but I wasn't thinking about Derek, or the divorce, or even the money. I was thinking about Grandma Ruth's grip on my hand, surprisingly strong for a dying woman, and her insistence that I attend the will reading, about the meaningful looks and careful words from Mrs. Robinson, about Jacob Porter's urgent voicemail that Derek didn't know existed. The taxi driver who picked me up outside watched me in his rearview mirror as I sat clutching my suitcase like a life raft. You okay, miss? He asked kindly. Had a rough morning? I'm about to find out, I replied, taking out my phone to finally return Jacob Porter's call. The phone rang twice before Jacob answered with a professional voice, but with an undertone I couldn't quite identify. Mrs. Campbell, I was expecting your call. Are you somewhere private, where we can talk? The taxi had just pulled up to a Marriott near Logan Airport, far enough from our apartment in Back Bay that Derek wouldn't accidentally find me. Mr. Porter, in your voicemail you mentioned something about the will reading. Derek said everything was already arranged. There was a pause followed by the sound of papers shuffling. Mrs. Campbell, your husband has made several assumptions about his grandmother's inheritance. Ruth was very specific in her instructions. Both you and Derek must attend the formal reading. Are you available tomorrow at 10? Derek mentioned the inheritance is worth $220 million, I said, needing to understand what game was being played. The gross value of the estate is indeed substantial, Jacob replied cautiously, measuring each word. However, Ruth was very specific regarding the conditions of distribution. I can't say more until the formal reading, but I strongly urge you to attend. Ruth insisted on it. After confirming I would be there, I paid the taxi driver and checked into the hotel with the credit card Derek didn't know about, the one I'd kept for emergencies since my first marriage. That afternoon, I ordered room service, a club sandwich I barely tasted. The TV played CNN on mute, while I browsed apartment listings on my laptop, trying to imagine starting over at 38 with whatever was left after Derek's financial devastation. That night, as I unpacked the hastily filled suitcase, I found Grandma Ruth's leather journal at the bottom, wrapped in one of my sweaters. Inside the front cover, beneath her dedication, was an envelope I hadn't seen before. My name was written on it, in Grandma Ruth's shaky handwriting, dated exactly 1 month before her death. The letter inside had several pages written in bursts, her handwriting growing weaker toward the end. My dear Olivia, it began. If you're reading this, things have unfolded as I feared. First, I owe you an apology. I knew who Derek was when you married him. I prayed that your influence might change him. Instead, he simply used your kindness as another resource to exploit. I had to set the letter down, my hands trembling. Outside, planes continued to take off, their lights blinking in the twilight. After a moment, I continued reading. Derek has always been this way. His mother, God rest her soul, left when she could no longer bear his lies. I blamed myself. I tried to compensate with money, with things, with endless second chances. I only made it worse. You once asked me why I lived so modestly despite my wealth. The truth is that I've been protecting that wealth from my grandson for years, knowing he would destroy it. The next paragraph took my breath away. I have made provisions in my will that Derek knows nothing about. He has never read it despite my attempts to discuss it with him. He assumes, as always, that everything will simply come to him. Jacob Porter has my complete instructions. Trust him. Attend the reading no matter what Derek says or does. Justice has a way of arriving in unexpected packages. The letter concluded with words that made me cry harder than I thought possible. You deserved better than what you got. Derek's marriage to you was the only right decision he ever made in his life. Though he'll never understand why. Be strong, dear one. What's coming will be difficult, but necessary. And please, don't blame yourself for any of this. There are people you cannot save, only survive. I carefully folded the letter and put it back in the journal. My phone, which I had silenced, showed 17 missed calls from Derek and dozens of text messages. The progression was almost comical in its predictability. First, the demands. Where are you? This is ridiculous. Then anger. You can't just disappear like this. We have things to discuss. Followed by fake concern. I'm worried about you. Just let me know you're okay. Then manipulation. We can work this out. Back to anger. You're being childish. Grow up. Next, the threats. I'll take everything in the divorce. You'll get nothing. And finally, malicious glee. The estate gets settled tomorrow. Thanks for making this easy by leaving. By the way, it was very generous of me to let you keep the apartment. You should be grateful. I didn't respond to any of them. I let him believe he had won, that I had simply fled defeated. The truth would come to light soon enough. The next morning, I forced myself to eat breakfast in the hotel lobby. Surrounded by business travelers, checking their emails. Normal people living normal lives. With no idea that at the table next to them, sat a woman whose entire existence had exploded and reformed in the span of 7. The elevator in Jacob Porter's building rose 20 floors as I studied my reflection in its polished doors. The professional woman looking back at me appeared serene, but inside my pulse raced with anticipation. I stepped into a reception area that oozed old money, dark wood paneling, leather chairs that had held secrets for decades, oil paintings of Boston's skyline before glass towers took over the city. Derek was already there, lounging in one of those leather chairs, as if he owned the place. The new suit he wore still had the subtle sheen of unworn fabric, probably purchased yesterday with a credit card he couldn't pay. A fake Rolex adorned his wrist. He didn't look up from his phone when I entered. Mr. and Mrs. Campbell, the receptionist announced. Mr. Porter will see you now. Only then did Derek acknowledge my presence, sliding his eyes over me with dismissive calculation. I wore the same dark gray blazer I'd worn to a dozen client meetings, the same practical slacks, the same modest watch Grandma Ruth had given me for Christmas 2 years ago. Jacob Porter's office occupied a corner of the building, with windows on 2 sides offering a view of the Charles River winding through the city. The attorney stood when we entered, his silver hair and dignity making Derek's flashy suit look even more like a costume. Please, sit down, said Jacob, gesturing to 2 chairs positioned in front of his imposing mahogany desk. Derek immediately tried to move his chair away from mine, as if proximity could contaminate his imminent fortune. Jacob observed this small performance with an expression I couldn't decipher. Before we begin, said Jacob, pulling out a thick folder from his desk drawer, I need to confirm some details. Derek, you requested a divorce from Olivia 3 days ago. Is that correct? Derek made an impatient gesture with his hand. Yes, it's all been processed. Can we move on to the distribution of the inheritance? I have appointments this afternoon. And you've both signed the papers. Jacob continued with perfectly neutral tone. Signed and submitted, confirmed Derek, leaning forward eagerly. Now regarding the $2 million, have you read your grandmother's will, Derek? Jacob interrupted, and the question dropped into the room like a stone in still water. Derek's enthusiasm faltered. Grandma told me years ago. I'm the only beneficiary. I asked if you've read the will, repeated Jacob, sliding the folder across the desk with deliberate precision. The actual document, not what you recall from conversations. I watched Derek's face shift from irritation to uncertainty. His hand hesitated before opening the folder, and I saw Jacob's mouth tighten in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Derek opened the folder with the confidence of someone about to confirm what they already know. I observed as his eyes scanned the first page, the legal language establishing Ruth's identity, her soundness of mind, the date of the will's last revision, just 1 month before her death. Derek frowned slightly, probably wondering why his grandmother had updated her will so recently, but he continued reading. On the second page is where everything changed. I could follow his reading by the way his face transformed. First, confusion as he encountered language about contingencies and conditions. Then disbelief as he reached the marriage clause, the requirement to remain married to me for a full year after Grandma Ruth's death, to inherit the entire estate. His hands began to tremble when he found the next section, the one about the charitable trust that would receive most of the estate if the marriage condition wasn't met. This can't be right, Derek whispered, his voice barely audible. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake, said Jacob calmly. Your grandmother was very specific. The complete inheritance of $220 million was contingent on you maintaining your marriage to Olivia. She believed, and I quote directly, that Derek needs Olivia's wisdom and stability to manage such wealth responsibly. Derek's face had gone pale, which made his fake tan look orange in the morning light streaming through the windows. But I filed for divorce. We can stop it. We can withdraw the papers. He turned to me, his eyes wild with panic. Olivia, we can fix this. Tell him we've reconciled. Jacob continued as if Derek hadn't spoken. According to the terms, if you initiate divorce proceedings within 1 year of Ruth's death, the majority of the estate, specifically $219,850,000, will transfer to the Wisdom First Foundation for financial education. In that case, you, Derek, will receive a sum of $7. How much? Derek asked, his voice breaking. $75,000, Jacob replied. Your grandmother considered it, and I quote, sufficient for Derek to start over and hopefully learn the value of work and loyalty. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the city noise from 20 floors below seemed to stop. Derek stared at the will, as if the words might rearrange themselves if he looked hard enough. Suddenly, his expensive new suit seemed to hang poorly on his shoulders, like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. Then came the negotiation. Olivia, please, said Derek, turning to me for the first time since he'd entered the office. We can work this out. I rushed things. I was emotional about Grandma. I looked directly into his eyes. You told me I was worthless to you. I didn't mean it. I was grieving. You know how grief affects people. You were searching for Palm Beach properties on Google before her body was cold. Derek's tactics shifted rapidly, cycling through every manipulation he'd ever used. First came the promises. We can split it. $110 million each. More money than either of us could ever spend. Then rationalization. Grandma would want us to work it out. She loved us both. Followed by threats. I'll contest the will. This is undue influence. You poisoned her against me. And finally, tears, real tears, that might have moved me if I hadn't seen him practice crying in the bathroom mirror before investor meetings. Derek, I said, with the calm voice that comes when you've moved beyond anger to something clearer. You spent 4 years living off my salary while pretending to be an entrepreneur. You lied to your dying grandmother, telling her you were caring for her while hiring nurses with her own money. You counted the days she had left like an advent calendar filled with $100 bills. And as soon as you thought you didn't need me anymore, you threw me away. I stood up, smoothing my slacks, and looked at the man I once thought I could save with enough patience and support. Your grandmother knew exactly who you were. That's why she set these conditions. She wanted to teach you one last lesson about the value of loyalty and honest work. I turned to Jacob. Please proceed with the divorce as requested. I think Grandma Ruth would appreciate knowing her fortune will help thousands of people learn financial literacy, something her grandson never bothered to acquire. Derek's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally a kind of broken desperation that might have been the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in years. That broken desperation hung in the air for just a moment before transforming into something uglier. He jumped to his feet, sending the leather chair spinning behind him, and pointed an accusing finger at me. You planned this. You and Grandma conspired against me, turned her against her own grandson. His voice rose with each word, bouncing off the wood-paneled walls of the law office. Jacob remained seated, calm as a lake, while Derek raged like a storm above him. Mr. Campbell, said Jacob quietly, I can assure you that your grandmother's will was drafted entirely at her direction. Mrs. Campbell had no knowledge of its contents until this moment. That's impossible. Derek slammed his hand down on the mahogany desk, making a crystal paperweight jump. She must have manipulated her. She was sick, vulnerable. This is undue influence, elder abuse. Something. Jacob opened another folder and removed several documents with official seals. Your grandmother updated her will multiple times over the last 5 years. And with each version, she added more specific conditions regarding your inheritance. She met with me monthly, while in perfect mental health. We have medical evaluations, witness statements, and video recordings of each session, where she explicitly outlined her reasoning. Video recordings. Derek's anger transformed into uncertainty. Your grandmother insisted on documenting everything. She anticipated you might contest the will. Jacob took out a tablet and scrolled to a file dated 6 weeks before Grandma Ruth's death. Would you like to see your grandmother explaining in her own words why she structured her estate this way? Derek sank into his chair as if Jacob had pulled out a gun instead of a tablet. No, that's not necessary. Jacob continued, relentless in his professional courtesy. There's more you should understand about the distribution. The $75,000 allocated to you isn't freely accessible. Your grandmother placed it in a trust with specific conditions. What conditions? Derek's voice had reduced to a barely audible whisper. You must provide proof of employment to access the funds. Full-time employment maintained for at least 6 months. The trust will release $15,000 upon proof of hiring, and the remaining $60,000 after 6 months of verified employment. Derek laughed. But it sounded more like choking. She's trying to control me even from the grave. She's trying to teach you what she couldn't while she was alive, I said softly. Derek turned to me again, but this time his anger had transformed into something desperate and cruel. You think you've won something here. You don't get anything either. You heard him. The money goes to a charity, not to you. Jacob cleared his throat. Actually, that's not entirely accurate, Mr. Campbell. There is a separate provision for Mrs. Campbell. Jacob pulled out another document. Ruth left you a personal legacy of $150,000 along with this note. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Grandma Ruth's handwriting. Inside was a brief message. For the new beginning you deserve, and for the kindness you showed to an old woman who didn't deserve it. Use it to build the life Derek never could give you. $150,000 was life-changing money. Enough for a down payment on a condo, to pay off the credit cards Derek had maxed out in my name, even to take some time off to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. This is insane, muttered Derek, running his hands through his carefully styled hair until it stood on end. $220 million. And it all goes to strangers because I filed for divorce 3 days too early. Not to strangers, corrected Jacob. To the Wisdom First Foundation for Financial Education. Your grandmother served on several nonprofit boards and personally selected the trustees for this foundation. They include educators, social workers, and financial advisors who will use the funds to teach practical money management to underserved communities. She considered it her true legacy. Derek's face contorted as he realized the gravity of his situation. I have nothing, he said. No job, no savings, no apartment. I spent everything I had, because I thought. He trailed off, unable to admit he had been counting his grandmother's money before she was even buried. You have $75,000 waiting for you to get a job, Jacob reminded him. That's more than many people have to start with. I'm 41 years old. Derek's voice cracked, rising toward hysteria. I haven't had a real job in 3 years. Who's gonna hire me? For what? His shouts had reached a pitch that made Jacob discreetly press a button under his desk. Within seconds, a security guard appeared at the door with a silent but unmistakable presence. Jacob stood, signaling the end of the meeting. I'm sorry, Mr. Campbell, but I believe we've covered all relevant aspects of the will. If you have further questions of a legal nature, my secretary would be happy to schedule another appointment. I rose as well, collecting my purse and the envelope with Grandma Ruth's note. The security guard approached Derek, who seemed to have completely deflated, sinking into his chair like a balloon that had lost all its air. I can't believe she did this to me, he muttered, more to himself than to us. She gave you exactly what you deserved, I said quietly. Just like she did for me. As I walked out of Jacob Porter's office, I felt as if a weight I'd been carrying for 4 years had been lifted from my shoulders. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was mine to decide. 6 months later, I was sitting on the balcony of my new condo in Cambridge, watching the sunset over the Charles River. The place was modest but bright, with bookshelves filled with the books Grandma Ruth had left me. I had paid off all the debts Derek had accumulated in my name, and invested the rest following the advice Grandma Ruth had given me during those Sunday conversations. I had also started volunteering with the Wisdom First Foundation, teaching basic financial concepts to women leaving abusive relationships. Each time I helped one of them open her first savings account or create her first budget, I felt that Grandma Ruth would be proud. I heard little about Derek. According to Jacob, he had found work as a sales associate at an electronics store in a mall. The job barely covered the rent on his tiny studio apartment in Alston, but it met the requirements to receive the $75,000 from the trust. Sometimes I wondered if he had learned anything from this experience, if his grandmother's final lesson had somehow penetrated his self-absorption. But then I remembered his cold, calculating eyes as he planned his luxury lifestyle over her still warm body, and I knew some people never really change. As for me, I had changed in ways I never imagined. Derek's betrayal, and Grandma Ruth's wisdom, had taught me to value myself, to recognize my own strength, and to understand that true wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in the wisdom to manage what you have, and the integrity with which you live. Every morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows of my new home, I opened the small leather journal Grandma Ruth had given me. I had filled nearly half its pages with thoughts, reflections, and plans. On the first page, I had copied the phrase she had repeated to me so often: wisdom matters more than wealth. One Sunday afternoon, as I was preparing coffee the way Grandma Ruth had taught me, my doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Robinson, along with other members of the book club. We thought you might like to join us, she said, showing me a copy of Pride and Prejudice. Ruth always said you were the granddaughter she wished she'd had. As I served coffee on my balcony to my new friends, I thought about Grandma Ruth and how her last act of love hadn't been leaving me money, but freeing me to build a life on my own terms, and perhaps in the process teaching others the same lesson she had taught me, that true wealth lies in wisdom, integrity, and the courage to be true to yourself. Justice, as she had whispered with her last breath, had indeed arrived in unexpected ways. Not as vengeance, but as liberation. Not as punishment, but as opportunity. The opportunity to begin again, to build something meaningful, and to honor the legacy of a woman who understood that wealth without wisdom is just expensive foolishness. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.